Good afternoon, everyone. This is the Budget and Tax Committee public hearing, March 3rd. We're going to begin with Senate Bill 849, Senator Lamb. We, of course, give everyone 2.5 minutes to speak, primary witness a little longer. That's the person right after the sponsor. And we have someone who will announce when your time is up. Other than that, I think we're pretty well set. Senator Lamb, property tax credit, airport noise zones.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Could I ask committee staff to bring up, there's some slides with some maps. I think that would be helpful if you can bring up the slides that were submitted as part of this. In the meantime, I'll go ahead and continue on. For the record, Clarence Lamb, Senator in District 12. This is Senate Bill 849. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. For the record, Clarence Lamb, Senator in District 12. As many of you know, over the last few years, the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, has been implementing a new air traffic control system called the Next Generation Air Transportation System, or NextGen for short, at BWI. And NextGen is reportedly supposed to reduce fuel consumption by allowing planes to fly more directly and have more compact flight routes. Next slide. You can advance to the next slide. NextGen, however, has resulted in significant increases in air traffic noise in communities under their flight path. Some of you may have seen this map before, particularly if you have districts that reside near BWI. On the left side of this slide is a map of the flight paths out of BWI prior to the introduction of NextGen. And as you can see, the purple arrivals and the green departures have become significantly more concentrated, which has increased the frequency at which residents have planes flying over them, as you can see over on the right. So the green, again, being departures and the purple being arrivals. What isn't captured on the map is that NextGen uses much more gradual climbs and descents of these aircraft. And so there's more gliding, there's actually more engine revving to be able to keep the flights stable in these more gradual climbs and descents. These two factors together mean that air traffic noise from BWI has actually increased significantly and is being experienced much further from the BWI than in the past. This also means that many more homes that were not exposed to air traffic noise when they were purchased are being exposed to significant noise now. Next slide. This graph shows the number of complainants and complaints about BWI air traffic noise from 2005 to 2017. And as you can see, the number of complaints began to increase sharply between 2014 and 15 when NextGen was first implemented at BWI. Prior to the implementation of NextGen, there were about 300 complaints a year, but in 2019 alone, there were 551,000 complaints. Next slide. The increased air traffic noise isn't just merely an annoyance, it has some very real health impacts for residents living under these flight paths, as the air traffic noise has been linked based on studies and other evidence to several adverse health outcomes, including heart disease, stroke, high blood pressure, and anxiety. In fact, a study of the NextGen flight path in Queens, New York for the LaGuardia has also found significant financial costs related to NextGen's adverse events on health. And so there's a study ongoing here in the state too that the Maryland Aviation Administration is engaging with UMB, University of Maryland, Baltimore, to look at this. In Europe, the World Health Organization has actually recommended that air traffic noise be kept below 45 decibels in order to reduce health risks. However, the FAA only considers noise above 65 decibels to be significant, and recalling that the decibel scale is actually logarithmic. So each increase is not an increase of simple magnitude, it's actually an increase of 10. Next slide. There are current resources. There aren't as many current resources or services for residents experiencing increased air traffic noise. The Maryland Aviation Administration used to run a property program and a residential sound insulation program, but these programs are both currently not operating anymore. The counties are able to provide a property tax credit to families living within a 75 decibel range of BWI, and that's pretty high. However, as you can see from this map, that means only properties that are within the most inner, the blue most inner line, and hopefully you can discern that there, which is almost exclusively made up of property that's actually already owned by BWI. So for the vast majority of residents affected by the BWI air traffic noise, they must either kind of just tolerate it or may have to spend their own money to install noise mitigation solutions because they're outside of that blue solid line where they would otherwise qualify for other mitigation services. This bill will allow counties to offer a property tax credit to households within the 65 decibel noise contour. And just to be clear, this is enabling. Although this bill does not represent all of the homes that are adversely affected by BWI air traffic noise, it is the furthest contour that the Maryland Aviation Administration currently maps. So what you see in there in blue is a 75 contour. We're actually proposing this legislation to go out to the 65 decibel noise contour, which is a little bit further out, not shown on this map, although MAA does keep a map of where that contour ends. The credit in this bill is an optional credit that would require action from the part of local jurisdictions, from county councils. Mako and Anne Arundel County submitted testimony that seems to suggest that this would automatically extend the credit throughout Anne Arundel County. That's probably a misreading there in the fiscal note. So just to be clear, this is really enabling and just limited to the 65 decibel contour extending out from BWI. So in closing, this is a small step in helping to address the issues residents living near BWI experience, and I think will help give some relief on a limited basis while there continues to be work on the larger fixes that are needed here as well. I know that we had Mary Reese, who was the one of the past chairs of the BWI roundtable, was going to testify in support of this bill. She had a family emergency come up, and so she's not able to be here on this bill right now. So with that, Mr. Chairman, let me close and pass the time back.
Thank you, Senator. So based on what you just said, the next witness would be Kevin Canale, favorable with amendments. Oh, he's just as written. Yeah, so actually looks like there are no other folks who want to testify in person. Any questions for the senator? Yes, Senator King.
I just have a question because I'm going through the same thing in my area with the Montgomery Air Park. And my question would be, how long have those homes been there by BWI? Was the airport there first or were the residents there first?
I mean, I think it really depends on the neighborhood, but my understanding from most of the communities around BWI is that I think the airport has been there for quite a while. So the airport itself probably predates much of the development that's occurred around the communities. But what's different now is the next gen flight system, that it's really concentrated, as you saw from some of the prior slides, the air traffic patterns. And what the BWI roundtable has found, that it's the equivalent of all of a sudden building a aircraft superhighway over their heads. Because they've been able to narrow the pathway more, create more efficiency in being able to stack the planes better. But unfortunately, that means that, the folks that are underneath of it hear a lot more, and it's just been exponentially increased, as you saw from the complaints.
Yeah. I hear those kind of complaints on a daily basis just from my little airport. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, any other questions? Thank you very much, Senator.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Hayes here yet?
He is.
Great. Senate Bill 858, Higher Education Coppin State University funding. Senator?
Good. Yes, good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of Budget and Tax. Sorry, I had to adjust my screen. I apologize for my tardiness. Time got away from me and trying to get from the State House. But thank you so much for the opportunity to present to you today on Senate Bill 858, which would include $3 million annual operating or capital for fiscal year 2023-2006 for Coppin State Universities. The funds will go towards establishing a new student union and 2 new dormitories. Just to give perspective, I know the way the bill is drafted, it may need certain tweaks to it given the committee's authority here, Mr. Chairman. But last year, Coppin State University had about 900 students and their families apply to on-campus housing. Currently, Coppin has about 650 units, and every year over the last 5 years, the number of on-campus housing has increased due to a number of factors. One, I think the university sits in a community that has a lot of disinvestment and families looking to have their young people educated there at the university are turned off, and it doesn't give them an opportunity to really attract these students. In the immediate neighborhood around Coppin, there's probably about 600 vacant homes. There's a lot of poverty in the area, and just within a quarter of a mile, and it's not a statistic that we like to often, celebrate, especially when you're talking about, the cherished institution. But in the last 2 years, there's been an excess of more than 2 to 3 dozen non-fatal shootings and homicide. All of those factors in the surrounding neighborhood contribute to their lack of ability to attract new students. We all know, looking at various research, that institutions that have on-campus housing available to their students, there are greater chance that increase retention as well as graduation rates. Here in the state of Maryland, the way we fund these institutions of higher education, and I think some of it is outlined in a testimony that you have from the Department of Budget and Management. And I had a chance to talk to the officials over at Budget and Management. I'm grateful that they were able to, before submitting the testimony today, make some revisions to it. And I get their point of view as fiscal stewards for the state of Maryland. There's 2 different ways in which you fund institutions of higher education, one of which this committee often deals with in the governor's CIP budget. And then there's the system fund of capital projects. And so the way the system fund typically fund projects, what they call auxiliary projects, which are revenue generating projects such as student housing as well as student unions. But what the system do in order to pay those loans, they actually use the revenue that's generated from the housing and as well as the student union building. Coppin is in a very unique situation in that it's one of the lowest tuitions in the state. The revenue that they actualize from their housing and their student union building does not always match up to the amount of funds that they would need. And I think there's some willingness on behalf of the system to float some bonds to fund it. The problem is, how will they, service those bonds? And so this legislation is really an effort to find some funding that the university will be able to use to service whatever bonds that the system may float on their behalf to fund some student housing. Plenty more information. I know you guys have a really packed agenda. I look forward to any questions that you all may have, but I would just say Coppin, unlike most institutions in the University of Maryland system, they educate their population is 70% Pell Grant recipients. And so those of you who are familiar with the requirements of qualifying for Pell Grants, they're serving the most challenged economically students in the state of Maryland. And so with that comes a lot of barriers to overcome. And so I really would love to partner with this committee to find ways that we could provide the appropriate resources as we would like to see enrollment and other things happen. I think this is a key part to increasing enrollment and attracting the bright students that Coppin have the opportunity to educate. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I would end my testimony and urge a favorable report as it relates to Senate Bill 858.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Peters has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have been working with Senator Hayes on this issue. Bowie State has had significant increases in their student enrollment because they've built 2 or 3 dormitories. Many of the students would come to Bowie State, visit, and then they'd go to another state, to another HBCU because they had nowhere to live. We didn't have enough dormitories. So we've increased our enrollment at least by a couple thousand. So I'll continue to work with you, Senator. They employed the P3 program there and got them in the ground faster. So, just wanted to let the committee know that we're working on that. We're trying to increase enrollment there at Coppin State.
No, and I appreciate that, Senator Peters. One of the things that the committee should know, oddly enough, in addition to attracting out-of-state students, a lot of students that live right in Baltimore choose to live on campus because of their home situations. Just as an example, I was mentoring a young man who lived in the Perkins Homes projects, public housing projects. And he was the only person in his household of 8 people living in a 2-bedroom flat that was going to school or had employment. And so having a place on campus is often a refuge so the young people could really provide, focus their time on their studies. But a huge amount of students that live right in Baltimore, even in walking distance from the school, express an interest in public housing just because of some of those reasons.
Very good. Other questions? All right, thank you, Senator.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Senator Huff, 850 gaming sports event wagering license, Longshots.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Senate Bill 850 would provide business, which is 5400 Holiday Entertainment LLC Trading, known as Longshots, an off-track betting site in Frederick County, would provide them with a sports wagering license. This bill language mirrors what Senator Chris West has brought in front of you too, Senate Bill 24, which would provide a license to the state fairgrounds. As you can see in the fiscal note, this legislation only goes into effect should the General Assembly pass the larger sports wagering regulation bill, or I would urge simply just including this facility in that larger bill. And I know your committee is working on that. I introduced this legislation because Longshots is the only betting location in Frederick County. And if it does not receive a sports wagering license, I fear that our county will be left behind. Just so you know, from Frederick County, we border West Virginia is actually only 10 minutes from my house. Pennsylvania is right across the state line. So without a place to do sports betting in Frederick County, that revenue will continue to go to other states. It'll go right across the line of Pennsylvania. It'll go right to the big casino in Charlestown. And outside of that, the nearest casino is almost an hour away. So this would not only benefit Frederick County, but it provides Central Maryland with a location, Central Maryland and another location for Western Maryland. This business is fully equipped to handle sports betting as they are already taking bets for horse races and off-track bets. The panel will further discuss how important economically and for the development of Frederick County will be. This is a boon for this area. Quite frankly, I fear because it's by a shopping mall. We all know the economics now that shopping malls are struggling. The old Sears, I used to work there selling washers and dryers, probably won't be there much longer. So this is a hotel right across from that. So I think it'll be very helpful. The delegation has voted in support of it. You should have a letter signed by myself and Senator Young on it. And with that, I'll turn it over to my panel.
Thank you, Senator. Just a point I'm sure you know that the Senate included off-track facilities last year in the bill that we had. Certainly, as you pointed out, working through all this right now, looking at the House bill and such, but that certainly was our inclination. I think, let's see, who do we have? Elise Cohen?
That's me.
I'm sorry, I apologize. First witness is Bruce Bariano.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Bruce Bariano. I'm here on behalf of Elise Cohen, who you're going to hear from in Longshots LLC, in strong support of this legislation. We thank Senator Huff and the entire Frederick County delegation for their support and consideration of this. As Ms. Cohen will indicate, Longshots LLC is a 100% woman-owned business. They've been in operation for several years now. They're a brick and mortar facility, and it's a venue where gaming and gambling is going on successfully and economically worthwhile and profitable for Frederick County and for the economy of that part of Frederick County. Really appreciate your remarks, Mr. Chairman. It is very logical that ongoing, already existing gambling sites and venues should be participating in sports wagering. I think when the public voted so strongly for this past election, they were hoping and anticipating that. And people are just going to go to Charleston, West Virginia, or Pennsylvania if they can't go to Frederick. So we would urge a favorable consideration, and we will work very closely and carefully with your committee in getting long shots included in the final product of your committee and the legislature as to sports wagering. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ms. Cohen?
Mr. Chairman and distinguished members of the Budget and Taxation Committee, thank you for having me today. I'm here as an owner of Longshots OTB and Restaurant in Frederick. As a woman-owned business and an established OTB, Longshots is an ideal candidate to help fuel economic development and grow tax revenues through sports wagering. I look forward to showcasing what we have to offer. First of all, Longshots is owned by women, me. In fact, I manage Longshots on a daily basis. As the sports wagering bill has been debated throughout the workshops, the resounding argument is for the expansion of licenses as well as greater minority inclusion. I couldn't agree more with both points. Yet I believe Longshots is the only woman-owned business represented to date. To provide you with some background, Longshots is an OTB that is not within a casino or racetrack. It is Frederick's only place to legally wager apart from the lottery. Located within the Clarion Inn and Frederick Event Center, Longshots has I-270 frontage and neighbors the regional mall. There are over 500 parking spaces, and prior to COVID, we held 400 plus events each year. Needless to say, it is a prime location. However, Frederick, one of Maryland's largest counties, is essentially excluded from Maryland's casino and gaming outlets. In fact, the closest casino to Frederick, as Senator Huff alluded, is Charlestown. And that's what I'm painfully aware of. Many game nights, I lose tons of revenue because my customers leave to go to bet in Charlestown. Millions of tax dollars are truly being lost, dollars that would otherwise contribute to our education budget. 2/3 of Frederick County voted in favor of sports wagering, and Longshots would provide those voters with a safe and comfortable atmosphere to do just that. In conclusion, we would appreciate being included in the sports wagering bill, as we would like to do our part in adding local jobs as well as growing Maryland tax revenues. Thank you again for this opportunity.
Thank you very much. And now my old Rick Weldon. Good to see you.
Mr. Chairman, what a pleasure it is to see you after all those years sitting next to each other on the floor of the House. And as I look at my screen with all the faces, I see Senator Eckert and Senator Edwards and Senator Griffith and Senator King, all of whom were mentors of mine my 2 terms in the House of Delegates. It's really wonderful to see you. And then maybe one of my longest mentors, even when he didn't know it, and that's Senator Young back when he was mayor of Frederick and a significant municipal official. This is just really great. So excuse my enthusiasm. Located at the confluence of Interstate 270, I-70, and Route 15, Longshots is perfectly positioned to capture bettors that travel now to the casino in Charlestown, West Virginia, and Pennsylvania. The infrastructure to support this type of use is already in place due to the large regional indoor shopping mall you've heard about, FSK Mall, and the surrounding pretty intensive commercial uses. No residential neighborhoods, no public schools, no churches, or any other incompatible use is proximate to this property. The prospective operator who you just heard from, in addition to being a woman-owned enterprise, comes from an incredibly well-respected family with several generations of history and commitment to the Frederick community. Back when the Maryland Racing Commission contemplated the decision to locate the OTB at where it is at Longshots at the Clarion, they considered many of the same conditions and considerations that might legitimize your decision to place sports wagering expansion at Longshots. All of their contemplation and considerations have been validated by the manner in which this operation currently, Longshots, has been operated. We know how important revenue generation will be to fulfilling our collective public policy goals in the years ahead. With legislation that's passed this year alone, there's a significant revenue capture that has to be undertaken. Expanding opportunities to siphon off gaming patrons who are already going over to Hollywood Casino in Charlestown and up into Pennsylvania will directly increase Maryland's revenue capture potential and opportunity. And I wouldn't be doing my job as the Chamber CEO for Frederick County if I didn't mention the potential for investment and expansion of the Clarion property with the addition of sports wagering. The capital infusion will allow for upgrades and enhancements to this important and contributing, I would describe it as a gateway property into Frederick County. So I certainly ask the committee's serious consideration of a favorable report either on Senate Bill 850 or inclusion of the Longshot site in whatever decision finally comes forward from the committee and advances through the General Assembly this year. And just a word of thanks. I'm watching every day. I still listen to the House floor feed. You guys are doing amazing work and a completely, no one could have anticipated the circumstances under which you're serving as stewards for the state of Maryland. And at least personally, as someone who used to spend some time doing this, I wanted to thank you for all the great work you've done and for the technology, creativity, and flexibility of the DLS staff. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Great to see you. Always happy to have another old colleague come back. Come back anytime. Okay, I believe that's it for those to testify. Any questions from the committee? Very good. Thank you, Senator. Senate Bill 861, Senator Bailey. This is St. Mary's County.
Good afternoon, Chairman Gazzone and members of the committee. Senator Jack Bailey, here today representing St. Mary's County. I'm here in support of Senate Bill 861. It is our public facilities bond. This local bill was requested by the St. Mary's County Board of Commissioners and authorizes the commissioners to borrow up to $30 million to finance the construction, improvement, and development of public facilities in St. Mary's County. The St. Mary's County delegation has passed this bill unanimously, and I request a favorable report on Senate Bill 861. I'd like to turn this over to Jeanette Cudmore, who is the Chief Financial Officer for St. Mary's County. I thank each of you for your consideration.
Thank you, Senator. Ms. Cudmore.
Yes, thank you, Senator Bailey. Hello, leadership and members of the Appropriations Subcommittee. On behalf of the Commissioners of St. Mary's County, it is our privilege to provide testimony on the request for the county's bond authorization for its ongoing capital improvement program. You have the fiscal and policy note, which breaks down the request. The county asked for bond authority of $30 million based on the proposed budget needs during the budget process, and listing of the projects provided details the basis for the request. Significant projects are airport improvements, $4 million, roadway and safety improvements, $4.5 million, Snow Hill Park, $2.3 million, and public schools safety and security, $3 million. The county has always requested the bond authority prior to budgeting for bonds as a revenue source. The commissioners want to make sure they have bond authority in place for any bonds that are budgeted. Because once the budget is approved and the beginning of the fiscal year begins, the county would like to move immediately into implementing these capital projects on behalf of its citizens. The county only sells bonds based on cash flow needs, and expenditures on approved capital projects are closely monitored monthly to ensure the finance department has an accurate and timely assessment of its obligations. When expenditures on bond-funded CIP projects reach $10 million, the county needs to start the process of selling bonds. It takes about 6 months from starting of the updating of the public offering statement to closing the bonds. The bond authority requested since 2008 is $178.9 million on Exhibit 1. The authority for 2008 and 2013 have been completely used, and the remaining balances are for 2017, the $11,524,310, and all of the 2018 through 20 authority, bringing the total available authority right now of $99,124,310, obligated to CIP FY 2021 and prior years' budgets. The estimated annual expense after the sale of the bonds will be approximately $2 million based on the current interest rate, with estimated sale date in FY 2024 based on terms of 20 years. The county is currently planning for a $30 million bond sale this spring with a closing date of May 25th, 2021, and will use the remaining of the 2017 bond authority and over 18 million of the 2018 authority. This will leave a balance of $69.1 million in authority. Ending June 30, 2020, the county's debt was $113.5 million and Metropolitan Commission was $96.9 for a combined debt of $210.2, 1.64% of the county's assessable base. The county's debt service as a percentage of revenues was 5.52% for June 30, 2020. We are well within our debt affordability on both ratios and continues through FY 2027. Should you have any further questions, please let me know, and thank you for letting me testify.
Thank you very much. Questions for the senator or witness? Thank you very much. Have a great day.
You too.
Thank you.
Senator Quarterman, 870, income tax subtraction modification, COVID-19 related distribution of income of retirement income. And before we start that, just a comment. I don't know if anybody else is hanging out in the room right now who was planning to talk on the BRFA, the Budget Reconciliation Act. That actually has a specific start time of 3. So if you are hanging out, we will probably even finish this list of bills before then and actually shut down and go vote. So you might as well just sort of come back. That would probably be better off. Okay, Senator Corbin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. For the record, Senator Paul Quarterman, District 2, Washington County. Thank you for the opportunity to present Senate Bill 870 to you this afternoon. At the beginning of this session, we spoke of the need to focus on bills that will provide relief to struggling Maryland families as a result of the COVID-19 crisis. The pandemic has financially impacted Marylanders all across the state, from Western Maryland to the Eastern Shore and all areas in between. Many have lost jobs, were temporarily laid off, were forced to stay at home and care for their loved ones diagnosed with COVID, and some were even forced to close their businesses. In an effort to make ends meet, some Marylanders have made early withdrawals from their retirement accounts. Senate Bill 870 would protect Marylanders from being penalized and taxed for the withdrawals they made as a result of experiencing adverse financial consequences due to the pandemic. Specifically, the scenarios are mentioned in the bill. If the individual's spouse or the individual's dependent was diagnosed with COVID-19, if the individual was furloughed, laid off, or had reduced working hours due to the pandemic, if the individual is unable to work due to the lack of childcare due to the pandemic, or if the individual's business was closed or had reduced hours due to the COVID-19 pandemic. If you look at the fiscal note, there are some issues. I'm not quite sure how DOS can project the $100 million fiscal impact. These are early withdrawals from retirement account to offset impacts from COVID. It's tax money that would otherwise be from an unknown future year and be spread out over any number of years. To say that the $100 million fiscal impact is going to be, I think a little bit misleading. But really the only reason this income is even available to be taxed this year is because of the pandemic. If there was no COVID-19, there'd be no early withdrawals due to COVID-19. And again, these withdrawals are being made in a time of crisis. And we are hopeful that we would not want the state to then profit off of these hardships. The federal government, tax purposes, an individual who receives an early distribution is generally subject to an additional 10% tax unless the distribution falls under an exception. The Federal CARES Act has allowed for an exception to the 10% early withdrawal tax for coronavirus-related distribution. What this bill is asking for is that the state would provide similar relief in the forgiveness of the tax in these situations. It appears MACO will be testifying after us opposing this bill, but I'd only add, as I mentioned earlier, these withdrawals will be made in a time of crisis, and we would hope that the counties would not want to profit off these hardships as well. Again, the intent of the bill is to provide relief to the struggling families here in Maryland. We appreciate the time that the committee has afforded us today, and we look for a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Actually, I don't have anyone else to testify today. MACO evidently provided written testimony.
All right, no problem. Thank you.
Any questions for the senator? Okay. You are up again with Senator Edwards. I'm reminded once again that Senator Edwards actually does represent part of Washington County, which I made a grave mistake some years ago. Senate Bill 871, Gaming, Sports and Event Wagering License for the minor league baseball team.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Again, for the record, Senator Paul Quarterman, District 2, Washington County, and thank you for the opportunity to present Senate Bill 871. This bill and the testimony will mirror some of that you just heard from Senator Huff, given the close proximity of our districts. The bill will allow the State Lottery and Gaming Control Commission to issue a sports and event wagering license to the owner of a professional Major League Baseball partner league or Atlantic League team that is located in Washington County. As you're aware from the previous testimony, Washington County, much the same as Frederick County, has the state of Pennsylvania to the north and West Virginia to the south, and they're very close. Senator Huff mentioned he's about 10 minutes or so from West Virginia. The city of Hagerstown, where I live, is pretty much equal distance to the two states. So Hagerstown, you go 5 miles to the north on Interstate 81, you're in Pennsylvania. You go 5 miles south, you're in West Virginia. Most significantly is there's a couple miles down to West Virginia. Again, as was testified previously, there's a casino in Charlestown, West Virginia, that currently allows sports betting. Every day there's countless amount of Marylanders leaving Washington County, going down the road and spending Maryland dollars in West Virginia. We believe that we should keep that money here in Maryland to support the revenues and support the initiatives here in Maryland. As the committee works through and determines the sports betting process throughout the state, we feel it's important that these licenses are issued in a manner that is geographically equitable. It's our hope that these discussions take place that the rural areas of the state are given the same opportunities for success as other parts of the state. The partnership between the Atlantic League professional baseball in our community provides a unique opportunity where sports betting can benefit both the local communities and the state of Maryland. I will add that while our county does have an OTB facility, they have not expressed any interest to date in being part of the sports betting discussion. And as such, we want to make sure we are keeping Washington County a part of the discussion. Thank you again for your consideration, and we respectfully ask a favorable report on Senate Bill 871. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Senator Edwards, you want to say anything?
I'm glad you remembered, Mr. Chairman, but play ball. That's all.
All right, Jacob Moore.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Jacob Moore with Greenwell Consulting, and I'm here today on behalf of the Maryland Cares for Baseball Coalition to ask for a favorable report on Senate Bill 871. So sports betting represents a rare opportunity to promote both legacy and new businesses across Maryland while funding the state's public education programs. This is a rapidly evolving industry, and among the 24 states who have legalized sports betting or are currently, like Maryland, legalizing sports betting, no two laws are the same. We feel that Maryland's proximity to other states, plus the DC metro area, with that, our market is strong enough to allow for smaller players to enter, including, MBEs and professional sports teams like the minor leagues. For nearly 100 years, Washington County's minor league team has been a part of the Hagerstown community, and a retail sports betting license would serve as a natural next step in its evolution. The team would look to partner with meaningful MBE partners, not just as investors, but to assist in the running of the sports book. We feel that this is an equitable path forward for the team and the stadium to grow with the culture of Washington County and the state of Maryland at large. Washington County is an increasingly diverse jurisdiction, and any entrance into such a large market space would reflect that. Operating retail sports betting here also solves the potential issue of geographic inequity. In the House's current sports betting proposal, some jurisdictions could have upwards of 3 retail locations within a single square mile. Meanwhile, there would be a single guaranteed license to cover the entirety of Maryland west of Laurel, which is an expanse of about 200 miles from tip to tip. But Hagerstown's population is growing, it's more diverse, it is younger, it is professional, and their strategic location along I-81 makes it a hub for Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and Virginia dollars. So with support from Senator Quarterman and Senator Edwards, I believe we can promote smart, equitable growth, and I truly believe that Western Maryland's best days are ahead of us. I ask that the state will allow all parts of Maryland to partake in this new market while building true legacy wealth for minority investors and business owners from all corners of our state. Thank you for your time, and once again, I request a favorable report on Senate Bill 871.
Thank you. Next up is Jack, is it Lavoy?
Yes, Lavoy.
Lavoy.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, my name is Jack Lavoy, and I'm a representative of the Southern Maryland Blue Crabs, which is a professional minor league baseball team located in Waldorf, Charles County, Maryland. We are part of the Maryland Cares for Baseball Coalition, which is minor league baseball teams during this pandemic, as you know, did not play in 2020 and are slated to become back on the scene, part of that fabric in 2021. We created this geographic coalition with the Hagerstown delegation purposefully many months ago because Charles County, like the Washington County and Hagerstown, is, at least right now, slated to be not necessarily included in at least the House draft of the legislation. The 6 casinos and the 3 racetracks are sort of at the top of the list on sports betting, and many others are sort of set thrust together to try to hash it out. So several areas of testimony last week on the House side indicated that many more licenses could be viable from an economic perspective to drive up demand within the state. And we too are favorable on this bill with a potential amendment that would be coming in from Senator Ellis and the Charles County delegation that would mirror exactly the language that Senator Quarterman put in. And the idea too is equity, both geographic and otherwise, that we don't want to see sort of, as Mr. Moore said, some of the large jurisdictions dominating these licenses, whether they're fixed licenses or linked to mobile licenses. And we would like to hope that places like Southern Maryland, Western Maryland get their fair share of these, and that it's something that is good for the community. We're looking at it, and I think the Washington County delegation would as well, as something that's a real essential foothold to keep minor league baseball viable, to keep the ballparks funded and improved and ahead of repairs that are much needed on all these ballparks, to keep fans coming and keep our major league associations and partnership agreements fresh, updated, and forward looking. So On behalf of the Southern Maryland Blue Crabs, we are in favor of this legislation with a potential amendment to include Charles County as well as Washington County. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That concludes the witnesses. Any questions from the committee? Okay, thank you, Senator. All right, Senator Hester, 885 Development Income Tax Credit for Catalytic Revitalization Projects.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, esteemed members of the committee. Can everybody hear me? Thumbs up? Okay. Thank you for this opportunity to present Senate Bill 885. For the record, Senator Katie Fry Hester. I don't know if you guys do slides or not in B&T. I had submitted slides. You could always pull them up on your laptop. They should be on the floor system. But I've got some great pictures of old buildings I wanted to show y'all.
Is that teed up, Kim, or not?
No, Senator.
Okay.
We didn't.
You have to look at them at our leisure.
Okay. I'll just walk you through through what's there. So you should have received a copy of the study that we recently did, along with an economic analysis report by the Able Foundation. And I was here last year talking about our existing Maryland Historic Tax Credit. And this year, I'm here with a more specific ask. SB 885 is aimed specifically at catalytic revitalization projects. And this is particularly important to projects that are large, formerly owned state or federal projects. These projects are spread across the state. In the presentation, you'll see that we have projects in every single county across the state, from Footer Dye Works in Cumberland and Phillips Packing Center in Cambridge to the National Park Seminary in Silver Spring and Fort Ritchie in Washington County. So this really could be used by many different types of large projects across the state. The thing is that we have a large inventory of these vacant buildings, and many of them are currently sitting empty. Take, for example, the Crownsville Hospital, which is no longer being used, but it costs the state nearly $2 million annually to keep it mothballed, secured in the grounds mode. That's $2 million of taxpayer money. On the other hand, what you'll hear shortly is that when these complexes are revitalized, such as the Springfield Hospital, which is now Warfield and Sykesville in my district, they could be generating substantial income for the town, the county, and the state. Somewhere between $2,000 to $4,000 per square foot once revitalized. What was I going to say? In addition, there's a number of other economic benefits that were pointed out in the Able report. For example, just lost my slide. Love technology. And the Able report says that for every $1 worth of tax credits issued, it generates $8 of economic activity. And for every $15 million of tax credits, it creates nearly 800 jobs. So investing in revitalization at this point in time is a great way to stimulate our economy and a great way to put people back to work. So what exactly does SB 885 do? I'm still struggling with my computer. Hold on just a second. It creates an initial tax credit certificate equal to 20% of the rehabilitation expenses. And this tax credit can be taken over 5 years, up to $3 million per project per year. And the way we've structured this, I'm not sure it's exactly accurate in the fiscal note, but it's not intended to impact the budget for several years. For example, if a project were to get the tax credit the first year the bill was enacted, they would have several years to become shovel ready and actually complete the project and get the tax credit in year 4 or 5. So it's a way to jumpstart the economy without costing a lot this year. This legislation was one of the key recommendations of the report that I mentioned earlier that we did with the Department of Planning and over 25 different stakeholders. And it's specifically modeled on a tax credit from Ohio. Their tax credit is a $25 million tax credit that is awarded to projects every 2 years. It's been used to redevelop the Goodyear headquarters in Akron and the May department store in Cleveland. And so they've had really, really great success with this. So with that kind of broad overview, I'd like to turn it over to my expert panel that includes the wonderful mayor from the coolest town in Maryland, Sykesville, Mayor Ian Shaw. It also includes Cheryl Waldell, an expert historian, historic redevelopment consultant who worked on the study with us 2 years ago, and Steve McLeaf of Warfield Development in Sykesville, who is doing his best to bring the old Springfield Hospital back to life as an economic engine for Sykesville. So with that, I will either answer questions or turn it over to the next person on my list.
Thank you, Senator. Mayor Shaw.
Okay, well, thank you, Chairman and distinguished members. We really appreciate you taking a look at this bill. Obviously, and I've sent written testimony for you to review. It's a little more comprehensive. One of the things that Senator Hester had mentioned is the cost of simply just mothballing these buildings. So the town, these were transferred to the town, yeah, and we did our best to keep it up, but it's been challenging to maintain these buildings, the historic structures over the years. So with the Warfield Development Group that is now the owner of the property, they have a planned employment center. We have an approved concept there, which is mixed use with housing, commercial, retail, and that kind of stuff, which we think can be still fantastic. However, the gulf is wide, as you can imagine, for remediation on a lot of these buildings, getting some of the things out that the state kind of left there. I mean, now we kind of, in hindsight, see why they were excited to transfer this property, because it got a lot of the remediation cost off the books for the state. So this is an effort really to maybe pick back up on that a little bit and sort of, without direct funds out of pocket, obviously, so we can get something that is built there. And as Senator Hester said, brings back economic development on a mixed use project. So I know you guys got a full schedule. So to the extent that the funds for this program would help the developer offset the cost of the historic restoration at this site, which is big. As you can imagine, these are big buildings. They've got a lot of issues, lead paint, asbestos, a lot of remediation costs. So to the extent that they can help facilitate that and make the current plan that we have approved, which is mixed use, which the town's really excited about getting done there, we're in full support of this. So we would ask you for your support. And with that, I'll turn the floor back over. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Steve McLeaf.
Actually, I was going to go after Cheryl N, but I'm happy to go ahead and go. Good afternoon. My name is Stephen McLeaf with the Warfield Companies, as Katie mentioned, and we're the owner and developer of Warfield at Historic Sykesville. I want to emphasize first that this is not a bill about one project. As you'll hear from Ms. Waldell, that Warfield is one of many larger properties, either currently or formerly owned by the state of Maryland, that are not economically viable for rehabilitation without significant public-private collaboration. Our cost gap, our difference between cost and finished value is somewhere around $30 million plus at Warfield. And a lot of it, as the mayor mentioned, relates to remediation costs and higher costs associated with historic preservation. The state tax credit, the existing state historic tax credit, while wonderful, is inadequate to take on large projects like this, with an annual cap, program cap of $9 million and a $3 million per project cap. We have a budget of over $65 million on this project, just the rehab portion of it. So the project, the existing program simply doesn't work for larger scale projects, and the catalytic tax credit is a remedy to that problem. I also want to say that this bill is as much about economic development as it is about historic preservation. Senator Hester referenced the ABLE report. I just want to highlight a few other things from the ABLE report, which was completed in 2019. Over the 11-year period between 2009 and 2019, there were 136 commercial projects that utilized $97 million in tax credit investment in Maryland. These projects generated a total economic impact in the Maryland economy of more than $790 million and 5,000 jobs earning $303 million. Only 25% of this was construction related. These same 136 projects generated over $33 million in incremental state and local taxes. 19 million of that was to the state and 14 million to local jurisdictions, which obviously these tax increases provide increased these incremental taxes provide increased funding for important public services and public projects, not just at the state level, but at the local level. And then the last thing I would emphasize from a study by the Center for Urban and Regional Analysis in 2017, this study found that rehabilitation projects paid back a state's initial tax credit investment within 5 years through the generation of new taxes. So I'd argue that the historic preservation and economic development are not mutually exclusive. They can actually be quite compatible. And the proposed catalytic tax credit bill is a much needed vehicle to encourage both in connection with these large historic complexes across the state. I thank you for your time and ask for a favorable report on the bill.
Thank you very much. Cheryl Waldell.
Thank you, Chairman and members of the Senate Budget and Taxation Committee. My name is Cheryl Waldell. I'm the principal of Waldell Preservation Services in Chestertown, Maryland. I'm here to testify in favor of Senate Bill 885, which will provide a catalytic historic tax credit to developers reusing large historic complexes formerly owned by the state or federal government. Things like VA hospitals, mental health hospitals, military installations. With David Shiver, economist, and Pat Sparks, a structural engineer, we were the author of the report just mentioned by Senator Hester, entitled Advancing the Preservation and Reuse of Maryland's Historic Complexes, which was submitted as part of my testimony. I am an expert on the redevelopment of historic complexes. I've helped to turn around places like the Presidio of San Francisco, a closed army post turned into a national park, but a different kind of national park where people are living and businesses are functioning. And it is earning $80 million a year in revenue. Or Fort Monroe in Hampton Roads, Virginia, where the former Army post has at least 100 historic buildings that are being used for business and residential use. A good place to live, work, and play. The reuse of Lorton Prison outside of Washington, D.C., and others. Successful reuse of such large historic complexes found throughout the nation are bringing investments in revitalization to both large and small communities. But you won't find many places like these examples in Maryland. The state is filled with historic complexes, which have been standing empty, often for decades, while the state pays millions to keep one or two guards watching them decline. These are places like Glendale in Prince George's County, the Tome School in Cecil County, all of which we studied. Even the office building of the Department of Housing and Community Development is surrounded by Crownsville, a former mental health hospital with empty buildings. Why has Maryland, which excels in so many good government programs, failed to attract the private capital to reuse these places? Maryland's historic tax credit program is not adequate to attract developers. The study that I did identified the structure of the existing state historic tax credit as a key barrier. Senate Bill 885 will begin to change this problem in Maryland. Senate Bill 885 will provide a catalytic tax credit. It's a proven solution, as you heard. having been used in Ohio for very large projects successfully, and is a great first step to turn this situation around in Maryland. Tax incentives are important because they help fill the financial gap, provide equity to the owner, and incentivize and
Please wrap up.
historic preservation. So do not delay. Senate Bill 885 will help Maryland entice developers into the state to redevelop these large historic complexes formerly owned by Maryland or the federal government. I strongly encourage a favorable report of Senate Bill 885 and truly thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ellie Cohen.
Hi, thank you so much. My name is Ellie Cowan. I am the Director of Advocacy at Preservation Maryland, and I'm here to support Senate Bill 885. Preservation Maryland is the, we worked with Sherilyn and we've worked with Senator Hester and Mr. McLeaf over the years to strengthen our state's historic tax credit, which is currently at starvation level funding at the $9 million, although it is, there is the opportunity to add more funding to this. But what Senate Bill 885 does is it creates a separate tax credit within the Department of Housing and Community Development to really focus on these large scale catalytic projects that have the ability to really jumpstart investment and economic revitalization in the communities in which they are. And as has been mentioned before, you know, this is all over the state. Maryland is blessed with a number of federal complexes as well as the formerly state-owned ones. And so we know that providing these types of incentives like a catalytic tax project really do encourage the private investment to leverage private dollars to rehabilitate not only historic complexes, but other large scale government complexes. So, you know, historic has a very specific meaning. And so we've worked with the Senator's office to ensure that if in the process of divesting these complexes, they lose their technical historic designation, they would not be precluded from utilizing this catalytic tax credit because we really believe in the power it has to help drive investment to disinvested areas, to disinvested projects. Really, this can be one of the manners in which we can get projects like this, like Warfields, like Fort Ritchie, moving forward. And so, you know, we are happy to offer our support and encourage a favorable report of Senate Bill 885. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, any questions for the Senator or this panel? Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, committee, Mr. Chairman.
Next up, Senator Alfrith and Simon Air, Property Tax Credit Business Entities State of Emergency, 887.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. For the record, Senator Sarah Alfrith, representing Maryland's 30th District, here to present Senate Bill 887, Property Tax Credit Business Entities State of Emergency, with Senator Simon Air is in his own committee today, but he is my partner in this. He presented this bill as a local bill originally. We've been working to make it a statewide bill. It's rather simple and elegant. I'll be very brief, Mr. Chair. It simply is enabling to allow counties and municipal governments to grant property tax credits to small businesses during a public health crisis state of emergency. So completely optional, but just another tool in the toolbox. This committee's been laser focused on supporting those most vulnerable and our small businesses during this pandemic. And this would just be an extra tool for our municipalities and counties to also do that same when it comes to property tax credits. Mr. Chair, I believe I have a couple of panelists who will be far more eloquent than I can, but it is a rather simple bill, and I'll leave it to my panelists and urge a favorable report. Thank you.
I just want to make sure that I didn't miss Senator Stallings before. Were you on the last bill, or you're interested in this bill? This bill? Okay. All right. So let's try to get through the panel. Michael Sanderson.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair and committee members. Michael Sanderson with the Maryland Association of Counties. We thank the sponsors for outreach on this bill. I'll just say, before the specifics of the bill, let me just make a structure of government comment. I know our organization is before your committee pretty routinely with written statements and sometimes at the testimony table, even remotely, talking about the right way to deal with local revenue incentives. And I just want to say, I think this bill does it exactly the way that your partners in local governments prefer. If there's a property tax incentive or another tax incentive that seems like it would be a useful tool to promote or to provide relief to some kind of activity or some kind of business, leaving that decision in the hands of the local decision maker is exactly the way we like it and the way we think it lets each community respond to their own needs. So the flexibility in this bill is well designed. I think the concept here is a good one, and we support the bill.
Thank you. Melvin Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members. I'm Melvin Thompson, representing the Restaurant Association of Maryland, and we support this legislation and thank the bill sponsors for bringing this legislation forward. As you know, Maryland's restaurant and food service industry continues to struggle to recover from the devastating financial losses related to the COVID pandemic and the operating restrictions we're under right now. And many full-service restaurants have seen their sales revenue drop by 50% or more, and caterers have suffered even greater losses. We sincerely appreciate the assistance that you provided through the Relief Act and the Recovery Now amendments, but the restaurant and food service industry needs help in various ways on our long road to recovery, and we believe that this legislation will provide additional relief to our struggling businesses, as the COVID state of emergency is likely to continue through most of this year. With sales losses and uncertainty about when business will return to normal, many restaurants and food service business owners believe that the value of their business property has also decreased. Allowing local jurisdictions to grant a property tax credit will help to address these concerns by providing additional relief to businesses that need it. In addition to the thousands of dollars that our businesses pay in real property taxes, our industry also pays personal property taxes on the equipment and fixtures that are necessary to operate. We are pleased that this legislation allows local jurisdictions to grant a credit for both. And we also appreciate that the bill also covers leased property, as many of our restaurants rent their business space and pay property taxes as part of their lease agreements. And for these reasons, we support this bill. We thank the sponsors, and we request a favorable report. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I believe that concludes the testimony on that bill. So yes, Senator Stallings, you had a question on this?
No, I just had a small comment. I want to thank the senator and both senators doing this bill. I have a Baltimore County bill that I'm doing, so I would just join in with you if I could. And I read it very well. I got with Senator Simon here about this, and it's something that I wanted to do also. So I just want to thank you doing it statewide, make it nice and easy for all of us. So thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, thank you all very much. All right, next up is 881, income tax work opportunity tax credit. This is mine. So this is a federal credit. If I had, unfortunately, I had hoped to get this ready and try to include it in the relief package. I think it would have been a great addition for that. This is an existing federal program. I'm trying to take some advantage of it for state use. We essentially it's gives employers a credit when they hire people who are out there struggling. And that's defined on the federal level in 10 different ways. I think we picked 4 of them in particular: people who receive TANF, SNAP, long-term unemployed, those type of individuals. Again, I think it would have been a great addition to the relief package. And so I still wanted to bring it forward and have an opportunity to discuss it. With that, the first witness is Adam Kane.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members committee. It's Adam Kane with Allegis, Redwood, Maxim Companies. We have about 11,000 employees based out of Hanover, Maryland, and we have some of the more iconic brands of Maryland-based companies like Aerotech, Erickson Living, TradePoint Atlantic, Maxim Healthcare, Thompson Gas, and many other different types of companies and types of industries. We're very proud of the partnership we've had with the state and this committee in particular in designing and working together on some of the most successful economic development projects in the state. And it really does take a partnership between private industry and the workforce, and as well as the political leadership. So we want to thank you for the continued support for all the folks in Maryland who've benefited from these programs. We've been particularly concerned, though, about the pandemic and the economic fallout, specifically the disparate impact, as everybody knows, on the truly vulnerable who are on unemployed and are on the state programs. Obviously, there's been a tremendous uneven impact of the recession, and those folks who were most vulnerable before the recession and faced barriers to the workforce before the recession are in a worse lot right now. And we're concerned as we look toward past the pandemic and recovery, how do we make sure that we get significant job growth at those ends of the spectrum where there's the most vulnerable and the most need. We're concerned that a lot of those jobs are not coming back either, given the economic disruptions and the technological disruptions. And we really want to work with you and the state to figure out how to best accelerate job growth there. What we've really been focusing on is really an innovative opportunity for Maryland. We thank the chairman for putting forth the bill. The bill really focuses on capitalizing on a similarly situated federal tax credit that's been around since 1996. It's called the Work Opportunity Tax Credit. And it basically identifies categories of folks that have faced barriers to being successful in the workforce and gives employers a tax credit for hiring them and providing significant hours of wages. The concept is to help subsidize re-entry into the workforce for these folks. And it's been successful at the federal level. The interesting thing about this tax credit, it's actually a partnership between the state and the federal level, because the state certifies the eligibility of these candidates, and then we forward those eligible candidates to the IRS for the tax credit. So the Department of Labor Licensing Regulation in Maryland does a great job processing all these candidates and checking to make sure that they're eligible. What at the federal level, if the maximum credit for most of these categories is a $2,400 credit if you hire from one of these categories, and there's you work at least 400 hours, the maximum opportunity is a $2,400 credit. What we were thinking through is if Maryland were considering how to really focus job growth on this population, and we identified a lot of this overlapping categories, but the most pertinent categories for what we're facing now in the COVID crisis and the economic fallout is really the folks who have been on long-term unemployment, which the feds define as 27 weeks or greater, on the SNAP program or the TANF programs, which are social safety net programs focused on families on food stamps and other long-term unemployed program. If Maryland were willing to join the feds and match or at least contribute an additional state tax credit, we could really supercharge job growth to those populations that really need it. So I think that what this bill does is it makes a statement, provides some resources to really focus and provide incentives for companies to focus on the population that have been most impacted by COVID economically as well as from the public health perspective. The program is a good program in many respects because it's targets these folks specifically where we have problems in the market, in the economic market. It only gives employers the credit if they actually hire these folks and provide a significant time of employment. And again, Maryland is already doing the work to certify the eligibility of these candidates. So it really is very minimal additional work for the state to perform to be able to get this type of a tax credit program up and running and serving those that it is intended to do. Additionally, because it is an existing tax credit, we believe that companies and employers know about it and they don't have to learn the complexities of any type of a new credit. They can just understand and implement the fact that Maryland has a additional companion credit to the federal credit. So we think it's the most efficient and easily explainable way to go to provide incentives to the people who most need it. So with that, of course, obviously, like any tax credit bill, it has a fiscal note. This particular bill, the fiscal note obviously does not consider the benefits to the state of taking people directly off of these state programs and providing opportunities in the job market. So I think, fiscally, you would have to weigh some benefit to taking people off the programs. And obviously, most importantly, it gives people who have faced barriers, faced challenges, looks like will continue to face barriers and challenges, opportunities and some dignity of entering the workforce. With that, Mr. Chairman, I thank you for the time and look forward to answering any questions.
Thank you. This is Old Home Week now. Mr. Jensen, good to see you.
Hi, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for having me. And it is Old Home Week. I'm looking at the Zoom and it's terrific to see a lot of friendly faces, and I hope to see you more. Until yesterday, I was the Secretary of Labor in the great state of Rhode Island. And many of you, we know each other from my time in the O'Malley administration, running the Department of Labor Licensing and Regulation as Deputy Secretary. I'm here today to, as actually the CEO of an organization called Research Improving People's Lives. Today is my first day on that job. We are a tech for social good nonprofit who works with government agencies to deploy technical solutions to public problems. So cloud-based computing and AI, things like that. I want to second everything Mr. Kane said. I agree with how good of a program this is for helping folks who are going to really need it coming out of the pandemic. But I would want to add just one thing. Because of the way that this program is administered, just like Mr. Kane described it, there is a very easy way to use data in order to establish the efficacy of this kind of a tax credit. And I think that's a really great practice. It's not hard at all to be able to tell folks who are getting jobs through this program and be able to compare them to, to other similarly situated people in the economy. So that makes this not only a great thing to do, but a responsible thing to do as well. So with that, it's good to see all of you and look forward to living and working back in Rhode Island again. Excuse me, Maryland again. When you're on Zoom, it's just very difficult to know where you are. I'm in Easton right now, by the way.
Well, welcome back. Good.
Thanks.
Mr. Millard.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the opportunity and members of the committee. Damon Millard, represent Family Legal Baltimore, which is the local management board for this city. Just here to express our support for the Work Opportunities Tax Credit, Senate Bill 881. I think all the key pieces and components of the legislation has been covered, but some of the issues that I would like to lift up in particular are the social justice and racial equity components. If we're looking at really in terms of one that this bill really focused on, it really provides the support for communities that have been marginalized and still yet consistently face significant barriers when it comes to employment. Specifically, which speaks to Baltimore, I would say in terms of including those who've been formerly incarcerated and returning citizens to our community, but also youth who are seeking summer employment, as well as the recipients of TANF and SNAP benefits, which would also qualify for a hand up toward economic mobility and opportunity. I heard the ABLE Foundation reports referenced quite a bit. Also included in terms of some of the findings with ABLE is that approximately 10,000 formerly incarcerated Marylanders return back to our communities from prison, and they face the very hard and real hurdle of not being employed. And so with that, basically the unemployment rate is about 50% for this population. In 2019, more than 16,000 Baltimore City youth applied for YouthWorks jobs through the Mayor's Office of Employment Development. Only 8,000 were able to be hired because of what was available in this capacity. SNAP recipients are restricted in much in terms of how much that they are allowed to make. But guess what? The demand continues to grow, especially now as it relates to the pandemic. So we are here to express our support for Senate Bill 881 from a standpoint in terms of social justice, but also economic mobility. And so I'm here to answer any questions from the committee, and I thank you for your time and your attention.
Thank you very much. Questions for the panel? Thank you all very much. Okay, next up is 882, operating budget, education programs, mandated funding. So this, I believe, unfortunately was the result of what I personally think of as a mistake in a funding matter. The Chesapeake Bay Foundation long has been a recipient of the SAI and the SAI program, which is through the Maryland Department of Education. They have a program, and I know most of you all are aware of this, that funds various nonprofits who provide educational opportunities and experiences to students throughout the state. Unfortunately, I believe that they were cut over a couple of years now, and all this bill does is try to improve that situation by reinstating that money back to them with a mandate. First up is Tom Ackerman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, I'm Tom Ackerman, Vice President of Education for the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. Thank you for inviting me to testify in strong support of SB 882, including the sponsor's amendment to bring SAIs back to their funding at FY20 levels. As a Harford County teacher 20 years ago, I took full advantage of the SAI program to bring my underserved students out to experiences with the National Aquarium, Maryland Science Center, the Maryland Zoo, and most importantly, the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. 30 years ago, I was a student who came out on a Chesapeake Bay Foundation experience, and that led me to pursuing a degree in science, eventually to becoming a teacher, to teaching about the Chesapeake Bay and our local environment, and eventually to my job now here at CBF. We have a teacher and a student who are going to share with you some information about the program from their perspective. So I'll actually take my time to talk a little bit about how CBF leverages these funds and what we do with this beyond just the money that the state and MSDE invest in our contract. Of course, you know, student field experiences are the base of what we do. We are working in every district of the state nearly every year to provide these important environmental literacy experiences. We raise private dollars to match MSDE's investment in our contract, and we use that money to waive fees for those schools that are high farms rate schools or Title I schools to make sure that we're able to include all Marylanders in our program. But on top of that student field program, we layer on several initiatives that help to promote environmental literacy in the state, that really help to not only achieve our academic objectives, but also our conservation objectives. We run a graduate level teacher training program that is among many of the teachers who participate noted as the best professional development they've ever received as teachers. We work with administrators, school building administrators, to establish programs and connect them with resources to create green learning at each of their schools. We run a student leadership program that takes those students that really want to take the next step over the summer on even more in-depth experiences and help train them to use their voices to speak out in their communities and at the state level. We go further by co-developing curriculum with our school system partners to really create the kind of experiences and connect with other local partners, including other SAIs, to create these great science-based experiences out in the watershed. Some of these experiences are the first time that Marylanders have a chance to get out on the Chesapeake Bay or their rivers and streams and experience the life and the bounty that's out there and our natural heritage, frankly. We have 40 years of sparkling evaluations of our program from MSDE. We've been given no reason why our funding was cut and cut entirely and uniquely among all SAIs, although I will mention that SAIs have been cut 20% over the last 2 years. And this takes away a vital and important piece of learning that our state, that Maryland recognizes, that not all learning happens just in the school building, and we'd like to see that restored. Please take a look at the written testimony that I provided, and please hear from our student and our teacher who are going to tell you a little bit more about our programs. And remember that this program serves every district in the state, and we would like to continue doing so, and we hope that the mistake that the chairman pointed out is something that you can rectify, and I urge you to support SB 882, including the sponsors amendment. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Emma Bashkaran.
Thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon, and good afternoon to all the members of the committee. I'm Hemalata Bhaskaran, and I'm a high school science teacher at James M. Bennett High in Salisbury, Maryland. And I have a small request. If you could all just take just 10 seconds away from your screen, just look at something green if possible. And if you could just imagine that one place in Maryland that you care about a lot. And the second thing I want you to imagine, I know I speak with an accent, but I can't fake David Attenborough, but I want you to imagine David Attenborough's voice or a British accent saying this. So this is a quote that he said, no one will protect what they don't care about, and no one will care about what they have never experienced. So these words are so powerful, and these words are what motivate me as a teacher to find those opportunities for my students to, one, learn outside, to experience their local environments, to take pride in their community, and to kind of take initiative and solve some of the local issues that they actually care about and that they value. And every single time, Chesapeake Bay Foundation has been instrumental in creating those opportunities for not just my students, but for students throughout Maryland. And if those opportunities don't exist, CBF has worked with our students to make their vision come to fruition. So what I personally love about CBF's programs, the education programs, is that they provide authentic learning experiences. These are experiences that are going to actually make our students innovative thinkers, problem solvers. The outdoor experiences that Tom actually mentioned, they actually create opportunities for students to actually develop those flexibility skills, those leadership skills, communication skills, all of which we know are 21st century skills that we all strive so hard to develop in our workforce. And CBF actually goes above and beyond just focusing on this leadership, the conservation effort. They have learning opportunities that focus so much on the social and the emotional development of our students. And I can actually sit here and talk to each and every one of you about so many instances where CBF educators have brought in science class lessons into my class, where they were building in mental health, creativity, and some of the work that my students have created through these lessons, through these experiences. They are showcased in so many levels. Personally, I've grown professionally For me to be able to sit here and talk to all of you, that wouldn't have been possible if it wasn't for the Teacher Environmental Literacy Leadership Program. So I've grown professionally, I've gotten comfortable, I've learned how to get out of my comfort zone and bring those creative opportunities to my students. I know I'm running a little more on my time. I just have two little things that I want to add. The first one is March 13th. I'm not sure how many of you remember March 13th, 2020. My life changed after that. And I know all of our students' lives and teachers' lives changed because that's the day we went home and then we stayed there for a very, very long time. And on April 1st, we got a call from CBF and they said, we want all the teachers, we want to hear from you. What do you want? And believe it or not, April 15th, CBF had an entire slew of materials. It's called the Learn Outside, Learn at Home. So by April 30th, I was able to take some of those lessons that were developed by educators and use them with my students through distance learning. And now our school is in hybrid. So CBF has a program called Online Watershed Learning, where my students are actually conducting investigations, where we have CBF educators who are coming into our class, they're Zooming. My students are actively conducting scientific experiments in this virtual world. And they did it last semester. And in literally 2 weeks, I have a fresh batch of kids who are going to have those same experiences. So no matter what our situation is, CBF is one of those places that I can actually trust to come up with those innovative things that I personally need as a teacher many times. And I don't have all the capability or bandwidth to do it. And I can just literally make a phone call, an email, a text, and things happen because of CBF. So I hope I can convince you all to please consider restoring the funds to CBF so that thousands of other students can benefit from what my students have had. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Sophia Liang.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee for the opportunity to speak. My name is Sophia Liang, and I'm a student from Poolsville High School. The first time I ever heard about CBF's Student Leadership Program, one of their 6 environmental education programs offered in Maryland, was from my 9th grade biology teacher. I knew I wanted to sign up right away. Due to COVID, summer expeditions went virtual. Nevertheless, I enjoyed every second I spent on the virtual expeditions. I met other students passionate about the environment and cultivated my love, appreciation, and concern for the Chesapeake Bay, learning all about environmental advocacy and the health of the watershed, from riparian buffers to heat islands and oysters to birds. Without programs like this, I and so many other students wouldn't get to gain the knowledge and understanding of the environment that we live in and interact with every day. One of the biggest ways this program has impacted me is through making my voice heard. I remember the very first letter I sent to my senator advocating for environmental legislation. To this day, I still can't believe that my email, among hundreds of others, was read and replied to. I felt grateful knowing that my words were acknowledged by my senator, and I'm grateful to have my voice heard today on this important issue. I wouldn't be speaking up today without CBF's environmental education programs. Please support the restoration of CBF's state-aided institution funding so that they can continue to offer these important experiences to students across the state. Through CBF, students like me are able to learn about their connection to the environment and are inspired to take the initiative to protect the environment that we are so fortunate to enjoy. Thank you for your time, and we urge the committee's favorable report of Senate Bill 882.
Thank you so much. Any questions for the panel? Okay, thank you very much. Have a great day. Okay, 883. I know you're all thinking, thank goodness this is the last one from me. This is tobacco tax out-of-state sales of premium cigars and pipe tobacco. So over the last couple of years, we've had a couple of opportunities to work with the law to ensure that online sales as well as brick and mortar are treated the same, and that's the goal here. It's the bottom line. There's no other objective, and we're going to get to that point. Evidently, there's been an issue with trying to collect the online sales. And all we want to walk away from in this session, because quite frankly, it's concerning to me that having thought that we actually achieved this, that it somehow isn't quite working yet. But that's the goal. Hopefully this bill does it, and we'll work through that. I'll point out that Senator Klossmeyer is here representing finance today because of their policy interest in this, but that's the basis of what this bill is all about, getting to that fairness that I thought we had actually already accomplished it at one point. First off is Mark Triplett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Mark Triplett. My video should be on, but it appears blank on my screen. I apologize for that. But I'm here today to testify on behalf of the Premium Cigar Coalition. That's actually a subset of the Cigar Association of America. And I'm here today in support of Senate Bill 883. It simply and specifically implements a report that was completed and delivered to the legislature by the comptroller on February 8th of 2021. We've asked that report be circulated amongst the committee. If you look at the report alongside 883, you will see that the purpose of 883 is exactly that. It's implementing the report and implementing the report very specifically. I'll also state that 883 does three very important things from my perspective. It provides the comptroller with the tools to validate the actual tax base for these sales. That's been the big issue that's been hard to overcome. It's been hard to get to a point that the comptroller could actually reach out and validate these sales from out-of-state companies into the state of Maryland. And so the tools are in the bill that allow the comptroller to validate the tax base for the actual tax base itself. But then it also provides a clear path for tax compliance for out-of-state premium cigar sellers to Maryland consumers. From my client's perspective, that's vitally important that they're confident that when they are paying the tax, that they're paying the tax on the right taxable value, and that they're in agreement with the comptroller as to what that taxable value is. But there's a third accomplishment that this bill, if passed and signed into law, will help and help me in a lot of ways in terms of my work on this project, is that this bill will serve as a model for other states as they struggle with this, to find ways to overcome those same compliance problems, because other states are struggling with this exact same scenario. It's not a Maryland problem. It's a problem of the combination of the tax system, for the excise tax system, and the way interstate commerce is conducted in this country. So we're not saying that the options to validate the tax base are the only options, and it's important that I leave the committee with that thought. We're saying that the two options that are in the bill are two options that we looked at a lot of options, but they're the two best options that we found to overcome that hurdle and give the comptroller those tools. And they're a good start. We're not saying there aren't other options that shouldn't be looked at. There's a rulemaking capacity in the bill that allows the comptroller to interpret and build on what we're putting in 883. But I'd also ask that if you're considering amendments to this bill as it goes forward, that please read those amendments with the thought of, do they add tools to the comptroller's ability to conduct this business, or do they reduce tools from his availability to be able to administer this bill and administer the report? We appreciate very much the comptroller's office and their work on this matter. They met with us many times and we worked it out. We figured out how to solve the problem and remove the barrier. So with that, I'll ask for your support on House Bill 883.
Thank you. Brett Leininger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, and thanks to the chairman for sponsoring the legislation. Brett Leininger here on behalf of the Cigar Association of America. I think Mark outlined things very well. And to just put a finer point, from back in 2019, there was legislation passed to require the online cigar companies to pay the tax. We quickly realized after the legislation came through, I'm getting some kind of feedback here. After the legislation came through that that there was an impossibility to calculate the excise tax. We did go to the Tax Enforcement Division of the Comptroller's Office, which will soon be with the Alcohol and Tobacco Commission, to figure out, to explain the problem. It was understood that there is a problem. Last year in the joint chairman's report, the legislature tasked the Comptroller's Office to figure out how to address the problem. And we worked diligently, as Mark said, on a national basis, and including Maryland in the process to figure out how to do that. On page 11 of the bill, lines 1 through 11 is kind of the real key provisions that are referenced in the comptroller's report. We had conversations with the Maryland Association of the actual brick and mortar stores. Appreciate Mr. Roddy's reaching out to us, and we've had ongoing conversations. They provided, initially they were unclear as to the language in lines 5 through 9, specifically if an out-of-state seller for a stock keeping unit or SKU is not available. The concern was that somehow we were trying to look for a way not to pay the tax. That's absolutely not the case. We had a good conversation. We've seen some language that would propose to modify what we have here. That language, we've looked at it this morning, does not do the trick. We really believe that what is in the bill does the trick, and it is in keeping with what is in the report. With that, urge a favorable report, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Matt Volk.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Matthew Foley of Cleaner Livingston, here on behalf of the Premium Cigar Retailers Association of Maryland. The association consists of over 30 adult-only brick and mortar premium cigar retailers in Maryland. And we thank the chair for bringing this bill, and we support SB 883 with an amendment. Our concern regarding SB 883 is limited to subsection 2 of page 11. We are concerned that this subsection may create an opportunity for out-of-state premium cigar sellers to substantially avoid paying the wholesale tax in Maryland. The subsection states that if the actual price paid for a cigar by an out-of-state seller is not available, then the average of the actual price paid over the previous 12-month calendar is applied for the wholesale tax. If the price paid is unknown, how is the comptroller going to necessarily going to be able to make this assessment? Or what if this is a new, unique, or special line product where the product hasn't been sold previously and an average price from the 12-month prior period cannot be determined? We suggest that clarifying language be included as to how exactly the price would be assessed and how to deal with an unknown price for unique or new products. We are working with the proponents and the comptroller's office to come up with an approach and a language that may better resolve our concerns and work for the proponents as well. Again, we support this bill and have limited concerns on this one subsection. We want to iron out this difference to ensure that the tax on out-of-state cigars is correctly assessed and collected. With that, we request this bill be considered for, favorable with amendment.
Thank you. Ms. Helmuth?
Good afternoon. My name is Feeny Helmuth. My family and I have owned and operated the Humidor Cigar Shop in Baltimore County for the last 24 years. We proudly provide our customers premium cigars, pipe tobaccos, and accessories at a fair price. I would like to thank the chairman for bringing Senate Bill 883 to the committee, and I look forward to working with you on the points that Matt Boley made. I am also available to the committee for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions for the panel? Thank you all very much. Moving on to Senator Jackson, 872, Income Tax Retraction Modification, Volunteer Fire Rescue and Emergency Medical Services.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. For the record, Senator Jackson, Senator for District 27, on behalf of Senate Bill 872. Senate Bill 872 is a piece of legislation that simply expedites an increase as the bill stands to $7,000 deduction for volunteer fire rescue and emergency services personnel who benefit from the Maryland Tax Incentive Program. Currently, the TIP program deduction is scheduled to be $6,500 for 2021 tax year. And this legislation would increase the deduction by $500. So, Mr. Chairman, you and your committee should have received an amendment that we're proposing, and I do apologize for arriving to you late. The amendment would, I can read you the number if you'd like. The amendment would push out the years beyond 2022 to 2027 and would end the amount for the deduction it would increase it to $10,000. On a personal note, members, this is one of the last pieces of legislation that my predecessor, President Emeritus Miller, and I discussed before my appointment to the Senate. He was very persistent in making sure I remembered to do something for the volunteer fire and rescue and EMS officers. As you may or may not know, up until recently, Calvert County was the only, which is one of our districts, was the only all volunteer fire rescue services in the state of Maryland until recently, because it is sort of a bedroom community, and most of the volunteer members there work as paid members either in the District of Columbia or another county. The services that were in use in Calvert County were diminished because of the number of individuals working there. So we had to draw from Prince George's, Charles, and sometimes St. Mary's County and Anne Arundel County. So the county has begun a process of hiring the emergency medical service workers. As a result of COVID, those first responders truly have faced additional challenges and dangers unlike they've ever had. So in the face of these challenges, this bill will provide a very small tax benefit for those who volunteer their time and away from their family to keep us safe in our communities. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd ask for the committee for a favorable report on the bill with a proposed amendment, and I'd be happy to answer any questions if the committee has any. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Any questions for the senator? Okay. Thank you very much, Senator.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, committee.
So as you can see, we won't be having any time in between now and 3 for voting. Unfortunately, somebody put too many bills in that created this problem, but yeah. So we're going to take 5 minutes and we'll get started at 3. So a quick little break and we'll get on with the BRFA at 3.
Hey, Charlotte.
Hey, good afternoon, Senator. How are you doing?
I'm good. Nice to see you.
Yeah. Did you all do the BRFA? The schedule
No,
system? Oh, okay.
It starts at 3. We just finished a bill hearing and taking a couple-minute break.
Oh,
So we're
are you
starting right at
voting on the
3.
BRFA? This is not for me to
No, just so you guys know, we're live, okay?
Okay.
All right. Just want to let everybody know.
Kim, is it appropriate for me to be here? That's what I'm
Oh,
trying to
yes,
do.
but I'm just letting you know
Okay.
that we're live. So if you turn your mics off.
Oh, well.
All right, perfect.
Sorry.
Good to
Thank
see you, Charlotte. Good to see you now.
Thanks. Yeah. Good to
All
see you.
right.
Well, kind of.
You can't see me.
Okay, if we can all get back. And as a reminder to the committee, if we could move, as soon as we finish up here with the BRFA, we can move back to the committee room as quickly as possible. Try to get a few more bills voted on. And as I pointed out on the floor, I have a hard stop of 5, so we really don't have a whole lot of time. So do your best to get back as quickly as possible. Secretary Brinkley on? Oh, there he is. How's that mic today?
I hope it's a lot better. We realized
Wow,
there's a lot
it
of
is.
operator error. Bought a nice new microphone, but we never went in and did the connections on the hardware to deactivate the laptop's microphone, and that's where it was operating from.
You sound good. I was thinking about spotting you some cash.
I don't think we need it this year, Mr. Chairman. You know.
All right. So committee, we have Secretary Brinkley, and I know Mark Nicole is probably by his side, and I'll let you kick off this hearing on the BRFA.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. It's good to be back in front of my committee, and we just had I think a successful hearing in front of appropriations, and for the public's benefit, a BRFA document or a BRFA legislation is required when we introduce a bill, and particularly in light of some of the things that we knew at that time or rather didn't know. So For the record, I'm David Brinkley, the Secretary of the Department of Budget and Management. With me today are Deputy Secretary Mark Nicole and Jonathan Martin, the Director of the Office of Budget Analysis. And I appreciate the opportunity to be here to testify in favor of the Governor's FY22 Budget Reconciliation and Financing Act. I'm here today to testify in favor of it and to answer any questions that you may have. I've submitted lengthy and detailed written testimony, Mr. Chairman, which I will not read to you, but to begin, I do remind you of the challenges that we faced this past year. When the legislature wrapped up last year's session, none of us knew what the impact of this pandemic would have on our state. We knew it would not be good, but we had no idea just how bad it would be and the everlasting impacts. We got our first glimpse into those dire circumstances last May, when Moody's Analytics predicted a $4 billion shortfall in revenues for FY21, and even more in those out years. In light of that, DBM made recommendations to the governor, and he quickly forwarded many of those recommendations to and for the Board of Public Works to adopt, which certainly helped alleviate some of those challenges early in the new fiscal year. Federal money from the CARES Act played a much more significant role in keeping our economy afloat than anyone ever could have anticipated. But we still had a significant hole from where we were 2 years ago, which necessitated significant BRFA actions, which you see in front of you, which create $826 million in savings between FY21 and 22, and an additional in out-year savings of $1.75 billion in general fund through FY26. So when constructing this year's budget, the state found itself in a position we'd never experienced before. Models for revenue projections have been turned on their heads as revenue responded more to the public health crisis than it did to economic pressures. It was quite a roller coaster as prediction after prediction missed their marks more often to the state's good, and revenue continued to outpace predictions. But take note, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, that Maryland was not unique to this fiscal roller coaster ride. Many of us compare this to a sugar high as a result of all the federal stimulus dollars that came into the state for things like unemployment, rental assistance, payroll protection, and other programs that kept people working and our economy from falling apart. So while our economy has not been as shattered as predicted, we are living in a time of great uncertainty and unpredictability. As a result, the reliable metrics that our revenue analysts have utilized to closely predict future revenues are no longer reliable. It was in front of this backdrop in September that we began building the state's budget, and the same volatile backdrop existed when we submitted this budget in January. During critical decision-making, we had no idea what impact the third wave of cases, which we were then in the midst of, would have, and we did not know whether there would be another federal stimulus package, much less what it would look like. Therefore, we felt it would be most fiscally prudent to do a modest budget that recognized all of this uncertainty, ensured critical services in light of what Maryland's families are enduring with the pandemic, and focused on reducing our out-year structural deficit. Frankly, Mr. Chairman, we didn't then, and we still don't know how long certain needs will last. So in preparing the FY22 budget in front of you, and more specifically this BRFA, we needed to address the state's critical and immediate needs while also achieving structural balance. So this included providing mandate relief, restructuring repayment of prior fund transfers, authorizing allowable uses of certain funds, making limited changes to the statute to facilitate our response to this pandemic, and other changes to current law for short and long-term budgetary relief. So these BRFA actions position the state for any future economic uncertainty, and they also create a structurally balanced budget. And Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, frankly, it also gives you the opportunity to do what you need to do too. So the BRFA continues this administration's efforts to enact meaningful mandate relief in both the short and long term. With many mandates, it adjusts future formulas to align with revenue growth, like in the case of the Cade and the Selinger formulas, thus giving predictability to community colleges and those non-public higher education facilities for out-year planning purposes. For the financial consumer protection mandate, we shift obligation away from the general fund to a special fund that has more than enough revenue and balance to keep this mandate going. In addition to mandate relief, this BRFA directs excess fund balances to the general fund or other specified budget or for other specified budget purposes. However, we are trying to maintain the original intent of those obligations. One of the biggest examples of this is the redirection of nearly $175 million from the marketplace facilitator revenues to the Education Trust Fund to offset shortfalls in the Education Trust Fund, keeping this administration's commitment and the constitutional requirement to keep the Education Trust Fund in a lockbox. Another action will allow us to use funds from the Blueprint for Maryland Future Fund to hold harmless counties in FY22, despite their very well-known declining enrollments, which, as you know, the statute requires that we utilize those enrollments in creating the formulas. And those declinations occurred as a result of the pandemic, thus spending these funds on their original dedicated purpose, that of education funding. This BRFA provision now has $150 million in funds included in the first supplemental budget to facilitate in-person classroom and summer school instruction. In addition to education funding, this BRFA recognizes general fund savings where programs have more than enough in special funds to cover annual costs. The Maryland Health Benefit Exchange is one such example of where this is occurring. On average, the exchange spends $4.7 million less than its annual mandated level. So this BRFA proposes reducing the annual mandate by $3 million, which, Mr. Chairman, still leaves a projected surplus, but allowing us to redirect additional resources to other healthcare related spending. Another example of this is in the state reinsurance program, where we swap $100 million in special funds from the program to $100 million in Medicaid funding, reducing general fund spending by $100 million until FY26. The state's reinsurance program has more than enough, over $800 million to absorb this cost for the next 6 years, and will still have sufficient resources to utilize if something were to happen. Another item I want to highlight to you is the Senior Prescription Drug Assistance Program. This provision will change the priority funding to set a maximum for the Community Health Resources Commission. By setting this ceiling for CHRC, it will allow more funds to flow into the Senior Prescription Drug Assistance Program, thereby allowing these excess funds to satisfy this growing segment of the budget. These are just some of the highlights that we have of what this BRFA attempts to do. Right-sizing mandates to align with actual spending, tweaking language to establish priorities in a post-pandemic reality, or at least we hope we're in the post-pandemic phase. That's beginning now. Using special funds instead of general funds when those special fund accounts have sufficient balances to cover the difference. And as I mentioned at the very beginning of these examples, ensuring funds wherever possible are spent for their original purposes. Education funding to education funding, healthcare spending for healthcare spending. So, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, before I conclude my remarks today, there is one more BRFA provision I want to highlight. At the beginning of this pandemic, the state needed cash in order to pay pandemic-related expenses that would eventually be covered for FEMA. For this cash, we would use the local income tax reserve account rather than scarce general funds. These funds have been used for PPE and vaccination efforts. Under this BRFA provision, FEMA reimbursements will then be deposited to the local income tax reserve account to make sure that it remains whole. Any claim that might be denied by FEMA, we hope that won't happen. We don't expect that will happen, but we will make up for that with the general fund in the next session. This is a critical item in this BRFA, and I trust you'll keep intact, because in this immediate post-pandemic era, this provision gives the state flexibility with cash to respond quickly to a crisis of this magnitude. So, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I thank you for your time. This concludes my prepared remarks for today. These are just some of the actions I wanted to highlight for you that we took at the beginning of this year to balance our state's budget. If we had known then what we know now, some of the provisions in this BRFA would not have been brought forward. That's why we have offered an amendment to you to strike, we've offered an amendment to this BRFA to strike the transfer tax provision, which was reflected in our most recently submitted supplemental budget. As amended, this BRFA ensures a balanced FY22 budget. It addresses certain aspects of the state's COVID-19 response, and it advances this administration's goal of resolving the ongoing structural gap. Now, I know that I haven't covered all of the BRFA items that may concern members of the committee. My team and I will attempt to answer your questions, and if we don't have answers now, we'll follow up. Again, Mr. Chairman, thank you again for allowing me to address you about this BRFA that we have for the FY22 budget. And we urge you to vote favorable with this amendment on Senate Bill 493.
Thank you very much. Questions for the Secretary or his team? Okay. I'm guessing this isn't right, but I'll say it anyway. I have one here, the possibility that the President of the Senate actually wanted to testify. Is that accurate?
I wish I could tell you an answer for that, but I can't.
Hearing none, we're going to move on to David Romans and Tanya Zimmerman, DLS. Mr. Romans.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're going to do a very brief presentation. Before we get into it, I wanted to call your attention to the BRFA fiscal note, which has a one-pager on each of the items the Secretary has been describing. I think it's a very helpful background for you. The document we're going to go through today, we're going to focus just on DLS recommendations to change the BRFA. There's a combination of actions that modify proposals from the administration and then add new items. Overall, they add to a little over 100 million of additional general fund options for balancing the budget. I'm going to turn it over to Tanya Zimmerman to walk you through the specific DLS recommendations.
Thank you. DLS made 15 recommendations for the BRFA. 5 are alternatives to the BRFA as introduced. 10 are new items. The first item that we recommended, as introduced, the BRFA proposes to eliminate the fiscal 2022 repayment of the transfer tax and then extends the repayment schedule by 1 year to make up for that payment. DLS is recommending repealing the repayments in their entirety. The next, as was noted, the BRFA as introduced proposes to expand the allowable uses of the Blueprint for Maryland's Future Fund to include some one-time COVID-related costs. DLS recommends further expanding the allowable uses to include those items that were included in supplemental budget number 1. In terms of the CareFirst premium tax exemption, as was noted, it would change the distribution to the Community Health Resources Commission to a cap rather than a floor, and the Senior Prescription Drug Assistance Program to a floor rather than a cap. DLS is recommending the change be phased in so that the Senior Prescription Drug Assistance Program would have 11.5 million in fiscal 2022, then going to the 14 million in fiscal 2023, which increases the amount of funding available to the Community Health Resources Commission in fiscal 2022. As introduced, the BRFA requires a transfer of $600 million in total from the provider assessment for the reinsurance program to support Medicaid. Based on the timing and the amount of the transfer, DLS notes that this needs a technical change to allow the transfer to occur from either fund balance or new revenue, and to clarify who makes the transfer. Finally, of the provisions as introduced, DLS recommends striking a provision that would authorize a transfer of $500,000 from the State Board of Pharmacy fund balance to the Office of Controlled Substances Administration due to concerns about the fund balance that would be remaining. For the new recommendations, DLS is recommending repealing the requirement that the Maryland Transit Administration's operating budget increase by 4.4% over the prior year appropriation. That's the final year of the mandate. The budget as introduced doesn't include the funding to support this mandate. The next two items are recommended transfers to the general fund. The first is a fiscal 2021 transfer of $5 million from the Rate Stabilization Fund, which was identified in the statewide closeout audit as being improperly retained. The second would recognize that funds that were used for the Coronavirus Aid Relief and Economic Security Act CARES grants that were provided to the contractor, but they had fund balance that could have been used. And so it would transfer funds from the Charlotte Hall Veterans Home Fund to the general fund. DLS is recommending a transfer, authorizing a transfer of $700,000 from the Board of Psychologists fund balance to the Behavioral Health Administration for Community Health Services. The remaining 6 recommendations withdraw funding from a variety of fiscal years. The largest of these is to delete the fiscal 2021 supplemental retirement payments statewide. This is a $75 million total fund reduction, $63 million in general funds. The next is to reduce fiscal 2021 funding in the DBM statewide program that were provided for statewide salary actions that are unneeded for that purpose. It's $1.8 million. Next is would be to require a reversion in the Maryland State Department of Education due to an improper encumbrance that was identified in the statewide closeout audit. The next reduces $5 million from the fiscal 2020 spending for the behavioral health provider assessments that are not needed to pay for bills that year. The next reduces $16.8 million in fiscal 2021 to reflect enhanced Medicaid match that wasn't claimed in the Developmental Disabilities Community Services Program. And finally, DLS recommends reducing the fiscal 2020 spending in the State Department of Education for non-public placements by $7.5 million, again, for funds that are not needed to pay bills for that year. The remainder of the document goes into more detail about these recommendations, but with that, we're happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Questions for DLS? I don't see anyone. There we go. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, great report. All right, first up, Brian Frazee.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Brian Frazee, and I'm here on behalf of the Maryland Hospital Association in support of the BRFA with amendments. Maryland's hospitals urged the Maryland General Assembly to reject Governor Hogan's proposed $35 million increase in the Medicaid deficit assessment. You all may recall that in 2015, when the assessment had ballooned to nearly $400 million at that time, Governor Hogan and the General Assembly committed to reducing the assessment by a certain amount each year. And reducing the assessment yields multiple benefits for individual Marylanders, but also for the state. It lessens financial burden on hospital patients because the assessment adds about 2% to every hospital bill in Maryland. And the assessment also artificially inflates Maryland's healthcare spending, which puts additional pressure on the state's ability to meet the cost-saving requirements of our unique total cost of care model agreement with the federal government. Last session, the Maryland General Assembly froze the Medicaid deficit assessment at its current fiscal year 2021 level indefinitely, and increasing the assessment for the first time in over 5 years would take away the significant progress that you all have made on this issue over the past several years. So with all of those reasons, we hope that the General Assembly will amend the BRFA to keep the assessment at its current level as agreed to last session. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions for Mr. Frazee? Okay, Charlotte Davis.
Good afternoon. Hi, I'm sorry, my video doesn't work. It says the host has to start it. Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Charlotte Davis. I'm the Executive Director of the Rural Maryland Council. I'm here today in support of Senate Bill 493 on behalf of Partners for Open Space. We are a statewide organization of environmental, agriculture, and historic preservation leaders that support the programming suite that is funded through Program Open Space. We support the governor's BRFA provision that delays the repayment of previous diverted funds for 1 year from fiscal to 2022 to 2023. This represents a $43.9 million deferment for 1 year. And I just wanted to remind everybody, we ask you to reject the DLS recommendation to eliminate the repayment altogether. We think this is important funds during this time as we see that the parks are being well used. Our farmers are working hard to produce food for our residents, and we need to ensure that we've got access to land for these entities. Over the past 20 years, before 2016, over $1 billion was diverted out of Program Open Space. You all, with your support, supported the law in 2016 that would require repayment of diverted funds. So that was just 5 years ago, and here we are. We do know that because of the pandemic, we're willing to wait a year. However, we would ask that you please reject to eliminate those repayments altogether. We believe that had those repayment funds been made, we would have been able to conserve over 9,500 additional acres. This land is important for economic development purposes, particularly in our rural areas with our state parks and our farms and our heritage areas. So we ask that you please reject that DLS recommendation and ask for your favorable support. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions for the witness? Okay. Lori Doyle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Lori Doyle on behalf of the Community Behavioral Health Association of Maryland, here to respectfully urge you to reject the language in the BRFA regarding the Community Health Resources Commission. The language switches the $8 million allocation from a floor to a ceiling, as Secretary Brinkley mentioned. And we know that the DLS recommendation would phase this in, so there's still more discussion, but the direction seems very clear and still the same. The Care First revenue that supports the CHRC and also the Senior Prescription Drug Program has decreased over time, so it pits two really worthwhile programs against one another. And in defense of the CHRC, their administrative expenses are very low, so this cut would hit the grants to the various social safety net programs that are its focus. And of course, they are very taxed now with the pandemic. And we also know that the focus now, and rightfully so, is on health disparities and the social determinants of health and the impact on economically vulnerable communities and communities of color. And that's exactly the focus of the CHRC. So we urge you to please look at that very carefully and respectfully to reject it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Sarah Fiedler.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'm Sarah Fiedler from the Maryland Independent College and University Association. We represent 13 state-aided private nonprofit institutions of higher education, and we serve over 60,000 students in both graduate and undergraduate programs. The BRFA, which we're discussing today, eliminates the statutory formula for the Joseph A. Selinger Program of Aid to our institutions and reduces this appropriation by $29.8 million. So we urge you to reject both of these provisions and to fully fund the Selinger program. The funding formula is a formula that links Selinger and our private nonprofit institutions to the other segments. It has existed since the 1970s for almost 50 years. And this ensures that the state's investment in our schools fosters a longstanding partnership among all of the segments of higher education. It also encourages cooperation and collaboration. By eliminating the link, the BRFA undermines the purpose of the formula and also disrupts the ability of the General Assembly to establish fiscal budget priorities. Further, it frustrates the intention that funding follow the student. So we request that you restore the Selinger program formula. Regarding the appropriation or level funding, this comes at a time of financial difficulty for our students, our faculty, our staff, and our communities. This is on the heels of the cut of $11 million at the Board of Public Works in July of 2020. And we use the vast majority of our Selinger funding for financial aid for Maryland students. So it's our students who will feel this cut most severely. We also use the funding for workforce development enhancements, career preparation, mentorship, internship programs, and multicultural and diversity training. This is why we have nationally touted retention and graduation rates. It's not just about getting the student in the door of the institution. We also need to ensure that the student persists and graduates. In addition to Selinger funds, we've been very fortunate to receive relief funding from the federal government and also from the administration. However, even with this relief, every one of our institutions has an ongoing gap in financial need, particularly, again, as communicated and felt by our students. In addition to Selinger funding, we use institutional-based funds for financial aid, and last year we used almost $300 million in institution-based aid for our students. With the gap that's created by our COVID losses and expenses, on top of every effort we've made to keep every member of our faculty and staff employed, applying funds in this manner becomes more challenging. So again, respectfully request that you fully fund the Selinger program this year. And I've included amendments with my testimony to effectuate this, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Questions? Okay, Pam Casemeyer.
Hello, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Pam Casemeyer here, actually on behalf of a number of clients on two different issues, so I'll speak quickly on both. The first is the Community Health Resource Commission. I would echo everything that you heard from Ms. Doyle. We also, on behalf of MedChi, the Maryland Association of Community Health Centers, the Academy of Pediatrics, we all have worked well, feel very strongly about the strength and importance of the commission, and do not believe that the funding priority switch that's in the BRFA is justified. As Lori said, their administrative costs are very low, so these actually affect the grants. And we know this committee and others already has a great respect for the commission, given your utilization for them for funding for other purposes. And this type of language has been in previous BRFAs, and you have thankfully and wisely rejected it, and would ask that you do so again this year. Switching gears to the child welfare system, on behalf of the Maryland Association of Resources for Families and Youth, there is within the BRFA a 4% rate increase for child welfare providers. But there's a problem with the way it's structured, because it is tied to December 31st, 2020. As you will remember, the Board of Public Works froze the child welfare rates at fiscal year 2020 levels in July. So through this pandemic and all the enhanced challenges the child welfare providers have had, they were working under rates that were a year old. They didn't even get their 2021 rates. So while 4% increase sounds good, it really should be tied to January 1, 2021. It's 1 day difference, but it would then tie that 4% to their fiscal 2021 year, not their fiscal 2020 year. It's a significant difference. Alternative to just changing the date, we would ask, it's possible you may want to just consider giving them a 4% increase to all providers as opposed to the 4% in their very complicated rate setting methodology, which does not always result in all providers getting that increase. But regardless, we would definitely ask you to not tie it to December 31st or before, but to January 1 of this year, which reflected their 2021 rates.
Okay. Thank you very much. Questions? Okay. Michael Sanderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members. I'm Michael Sanderson with the Maryland Association of Counties. We submitted a written statement covering a handful of different items in the reconciliation bill. I'll try and speak briefly to 3 of them. One, I think you'll hear in more details from other speakers from community colleges. With the funding cut that's proposed to the CADE formula, I would just say when it comes to the budget reconciliation bill, taking a hit for a year or sometimes for 2 years because times are tight is one thing, but going back and revisiting and rewriting long-term policy, which is what's proposed there, to rebase and reset and basically set aside that long-term vision for what community colleges ought to be doing and how they should be supported, that's a bigger ask than really ought to be as a piece of this big bill. Second item I'll mention is there are a couple of cost shifts that are proposed in the BRFA bill this year. One is an old standby, one is new. Both of them make relatively little sense. The shifting of administrative costs for the assessment function at the office of the Department of Assessments and Taxation. You have years of statements from your own staff saying that this is a bad policy idea, that Maryland does this the right way by having centralized staff who don't have sort of skin in the game of how the assessments work. Maryland does this the right way, and turning this into billing all those costs to counties is going in the wrong direction as a matter of public policy. Along somewhat similar lines, the notion of sharing costs retroactively for wrongful convictions and assigning those costs to your local governments. I guess the philosophy there was that prosecutors in the state's attorney's office are the ones who need to be held accountable or something along those lines, but that's not who foots the bill. This ends up being a squeeze on county government services. State's attorneys are independently elected. They're funded through county budgets, but we don't manage them. All we would end up doing is just writing checks for those issues. I don't think it creates new accountability or wiser incentives in any way that advances public policy. It's not good budgeting, it's just shifting papers around. And finally, I'll mention school funding. The budget analysis that DLS has presented on aid to education raises this issue, but a piece is in the BRFA, so I'll mention it here. Enrollment dropped in September of 2020 for reasons that are beyond just like, it's one-time stuff. So the right thing to do is to manage that as a one-time blip. The budget proposes some extra funds and the BRFA asks you to make that available. At the state level, that makes sense. The BRFA also asks that counties do a hold harmless grant to their jurisdictions, basically ignore this year's kid count. That probably makes sense too, but the third piece needs to be accommodate this under the maintenance of effort laws so that when those kids come back, hopefully this coming fall, you don't have an artificial bump up in state mandated local funding. That's the third leg of the stool, and you need that either in this bill or perhaps in a forthcoming education follow-up bill. The third leg of the stool will bring the whole thing together, and I think the plan will work fine. So with that, several amendments suggested in our written testimony, and appreciate the time.
Thank you very much. Questions? Okay, Rachel Faulkner.
Hi, good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee. Rachel Faulkner here with the Licensed Clinical Professional Counselors of Maryland. To specifically address Section 5 of the BRFA, they're strongly opposed to transferring $2 million from the Board of Professional Counselors and Therapists to the Behavioral Health Administration. Just a reminder to the committees that the board is special funded through licensing fees and renewal fees from licensed professional counselors and a number of other professional groups under the board. We're aware of the large fund balance and are very interested in the board reinvesting those licensing fee dollars into supporting the board, which is one of the reasons that we've submitted support testimony for Senate Bill 262, sponsored by Senator Eckert, to look at creating a modern IT platform. The Board of Professional Counselors is still using paper applications, coming in to collect mail, and really could use the funds that they have to really support the work of the board and the licensees. If that's not possible, to amend the BRFA for that purpose, we very much would like the committees to adopt some narrative that looks at the fee structure for the Board of Professional Counselors and Therapists. The board approximately 3 years ago raised an additional fee for licensees to become board approved supervisors. And so we just want to make sure that a fund balance of $2.5 million doesn't occur in the future, and that fees, revenue and expenditures are matched equally, so that licensees aren't paying more than they should be, and that funds are used for board purposes and not moved around within the Department of Health. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions? Brad Phillips.
Oh, good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name again is Brad Phillips. I'm the Deputy Executive Director for the Maryland Association of Community Colleges. And thank you so much for letting me speak on the impact of the BRFA, Senate Bill 493, for our colleges. COVID-19, the pandemic, has essentially flung community colleges and our students up in the air. And I fear we're going to land right back where we started, which is a lack of equitable state support among Maryland's public colleges and universities. I welcome a much broader conversation on this topic whenever anybody has the time, but I do want to just make a few points today. The John A. Cade funding formula, which is how our aid is based, is more than a distribution formula. It's a policy. The policy is to tie support to the community colleges to the allocation given to the public four-year institutions, that ultimately being a 29% tie. The percentage tie allows us to all rise and fall together, unified, acknowledging that there will be years when funding can be tight, revenues can decline, and reductions will need to be made. But if the public four-year institutions are reduced, we would also be reduced, but that percentage tie would remain intact, equalizing the difficult decisions of having to reduce funding in higher education. The BRFA never acknowledges the policy, nor does it distribute the pain equally among Maryland's public higher education institutions when it breaks that percentage tie or rebases our formula. What the bill does is take an additional bite out of community colleges and harms the population of students who need the most support in a time when our colleges also need the most support, especially if we are going to be tasked with the responsibility of rebuilding the Maryland economy after the pandemic. We can't continue to treat community college students in this way. Balancing the budget on the very people most impacted by college affordability is the opposite of building an inclusive economy for all of Marylanders. We have to start treating our students in an equal manner as students attending public universities. And that is also why the committee should reject the additional BRFA language that would tie our funding to the growth in state revenue. I think Michael Sanderson really added everything that needs to be said on that. But passing such language would remove the best tool that you have in remedying economic inequalities that address the social issues our state is facing. So I urge you to oppose the BRFA language and the tie to the state revenue growth as it pertains to CADE. And thank you for your time, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Questions? Richard Midcat.
Good afternoon. For the record, I'm Richard Midcat, president of Garrett College. I would like to thank the committee for the opportunity to speak against two sections of SB 493 that reference community colleges. The governor's BRFA submission would rescind nearly 2/3 of the increase in FY22 state funding for community colleges. While on its face, the 5.5% increase is reasonable, to fully appreciate the community college's position requires context. This year's BRFA comes on the heels of flat FY21 community college state funding and mark the 8th time since 2009 that community college state funding has been rebased. The net effect of these actions has been the loss of over $140 million in state aid to Maryland community colleges since 2009. While FY22 funding is a short-term issue, the provision of the BRFA that would tie future state community college funding to growth in state revenue estimates is a proposal with long-term and potentially dire consequences for community colleges. The CADE formula, which as Brad noted, ties community college funding to the per student funding at select four-year universities, doesn't just provide a strategy for equitable state aid to community colleges. It also supports necessary long-term fiscal planning by the community colleges, which would be lost in this BRFA proposal. I urge the committee to acknowledge the prior fiscal sacrifices taken by community colleges and address the compelling funding needs that community colleges face by removing the budget reductions to community colleges and also the elimination of the CADE formula currently included in SB 493. Thank you again for this opportunity.
Thank you very much. Questions? Okay, Laura Bogley.
Good afternoon, Chairman Gazone and members of the committee. I'm Laura Bogley, and I serve as the Legislative Director for Maryland Right to Life. On behalf of our members across the state, we strongly oppose Senate Bill 93 because it forces Maryland taxpayers to fund abortion providers and deprives the people our natural and constitutional rights to life, liberty, freedom of speech, and religion. This bill mandates an annual $100 million in taxpayer funding to reimburse medical care providers. This includes at least 3 programs that fund abortion providers. The Medical Assistance Program is the primary vehicle for Medicaid reimbursements to abortion providers. In 2019, taxpayers paid more than $6 million for more than 9,660 abortions, none of which were to save the life of the mother. When the Supreme Court of the United States declared abortion legal, overturning the lawfully enacted statutes of 46 states, including Maryland, they promised us that abortion would be safe, legal, and rare. But as long as the state entrusts those who stand to profit from the sale of abortions with the education and care of women and children, abortion will be neither safe nor rare. In their annual report, Planned Parenthood reports that the abortion business is thriving and that in the last year they committed 354,871 abortions, nearly an all-time high. In stark contrast, Planned Parenthood's prenatal services and adoption referrals have dropped by double digits. Yet the state continues to force Maryland taxpayers to compensate abortion providers under the guise of family planning. The state is failing Maryland women and children. Legal abortion has reached epidemic proportions and is the leading killer of Black lives, more than gun violence and all other causes combined. The majority of women do not choose abortion, but feel they have no other choice because the state is not investing in real choices, real solutions. Women and families deserve better than abortion, and public funds should be prioritized for programs that save the lives of both mothers and children, and there is bipartisan support for this. For these reasons, we respectfully urge you to uphold your oath of office to protect the constitutional rights of all human beings, both born and preborn, and ask you to vote against this bill. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Questions? Thank you. Nicholas Cohen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, honorable members of the committee. My name is Nicholas Cohen. I'm the Executive Director of Maryland Citizens for the Arts, and we're the nonprofit organization that serves as the statewide advocacy group for public investment in the arts. I'm here today to provide a voice for thousands of concerned arts constituents. To that end, I respectfully ask that lawmakers reject the governor's proposed alteration of the Maryland State Arts Council's funding formula found in the 21 BRFA. This funding cut would reach at least $5.6 million by fiscal year 26 and result in an almost $24 million cut across the next 5 fiscal years. This would be a devastating blow for the Maryland arts economy and potentially lead to massive layoffs, closures, and a prolonged and stifled economic recovery. The current State Arts Council funding formula is considered a national model in terms of arts legislation. Passed in 1994 as the Art Stabilization Act, it has helped create an equitable source of funding that shifted capital away from just a few large arts organizations and instead helped create the current funding structure deployed by the State Arts Council, who now provides investment for over 300 arts organizations, 24 county arts councils, thousands of independent artists, and numerous arts education programs across Maryland. To change a successful and critical source of investment in the middle of a health and economic crisis would be akin to shutting off a fire hose while a building was burning to the ground. It simply doesn't make any financial sense. Much as the hospitality and restaurant sectors have been suffering massive losses due to COVID-19, arts organizations and artists have also been financially decimated across the state due to the closures of almost all arts-related activities and venues since March of last year. The economic challenges suffered by this once-in-a-generation pandemic have been significant and widespread. The arts industry have never before seen such a massive economic decline, and this downturn within the arts sector is significantly more extensive and more devastating than the Great Recession of 2008. Now is not the time for disinvestment. Instead, I respectfully ask this committee to continue their wonderful and steadfast support of the arts and fully reject the governor's proposed funding formula change and fully fund the Maryland State Arts Council at $27.3 million. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Questions? Okay. Last up, Allison Taylor.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Allison Taylor, and I'm here on behalf of Kaiser Permanente. I wanted to bring two concerns to the committee as it relates to the BRFA. The first is the proposed transfer of $100 million out of the reinsurance fund every year from FY 21 through FY 26. This, as you all may know, the reinsurance program pays claims for individuals in the individual market, which helps bring down the cost of health insurance for that population, and has been very successful in doing so over the past couple of years. It's funded by federal pass-through funding, but also an assessment that's collected at the state level, and the assessment is what's being proposed to be transferred. We would note, as was noted by DLS, that the assessment is set to sunset in 2023. This transfer would go through 2026, so that's why they're proposing a technical correction. But did want to let the committee know that the state learned last week that we'll be getting less federal funding, at least in the next year, than was anticipated. And so it may be, I think it's a little premature to know whether there'll be enough money, certainly going forward to 2026, to make this transfer every year. So we'd ask the committee to proceed with caution in that arrangement. Also wanted to point out, it's not clear to us that Medicaid would be able to get a federal match from this money. So if that's the case, it would make it not a real efficient use of resources to make this transfer. And so wanted to just raise that question for the committee's consideration. And I do have some numbers in my written testimony to show the effectiveness that the reinsurance program has had in lowering premiums and increasing enrollment. The second thing I want to touch on real quick is there's a proposed cut to the budget of the Maryland Health Benefit Exchange in the BRFA. The exchange is anticipating that this cut would come out of their call center contracts, which help enroll people in Medicaid and in individual small group coverage. There's a lot of churn in the insurance market these days related to COVID, and a greater need for people to get help through the exchange. So we're not sure that this is the right time to make a cut there. Also would note that there's a lot of federal changes coming related to the Affordable Care Act that the Biden administration is pursuing, and that would, to the extent it requires implementation at the state level, that would be done by the exchange and would add to their workload, which is something that the administration couldn't have predicted when they put the budget together. So we urge the committee to reject the cut to their operating budget. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions for the witness? Okay, that concludes our BRFA hearing. As I mentioned, committee, if we could all move to the committee